Michael, let me tell you a little secret. I would love to believe in the existence of God for a whole host of reasons. But every time I hear the arguments of theists, I get more and more discouraged. I may believe in their conclusion, but I'm discouraged by their arguments. There seems to be so much kinds of fallacious thinking. As a philosopher, how do you look upon some of the methodologies that theists use to prove the existence of God?
One thing that happens quite frequently is that something's put forward as an argument in support of the existence of God, but it's really, if it's a proof of something very different. So, for example, you have arguments for a first cause, arguments for a non-moved mover, arguments for a being that's necessary and has a necessity of itself, okay, right? If you look at those arguments, right, some of those don't even give you a reason for believing in a personal sort of being, right? I mean, the first cause could be something purely physical, right?
A deist view.
Right.
Yeah.
The non-moved mover could be something purely physical, right? So you don't get an argument for a personal God, let alone a God, for example, who's omnipotent and omniscient, and let alone an argument for a God who's good or perfectly good, right? So some arguments are fallacious simply because they don't bear upon certain crucial properties of God, like being a personal God or being morally perfect.
So that's an interesting point, that where some would prove or infer to a best explanation instead of prove a God, that may or may not give them the point they want to make, but it's, even if they do, it certainly doesn't follow that you have all these other kinds of characteristics.
That's right, yes.
Other kinds of fallacies.
Well, other problems arise in arguments that appeal to personal religious experiences, right? And so a Christian may appeal to his or her personal religious experiences for believing that God exists or that Jesus is the Son of God and so on. And what's overlooked here is that people in other religions have experiences that are really quite comparable and that lead to conflicting conclusions, right? And so a person who's a Muslim has religious experiences that lead him or her to believe in the existence of Allah, defined as a purely monotheistic, non-Trinitarian God, right? People in Eastern religions have experiences that are compatible with polytheism, etc., right? And so typically people focus upon their own experiences and don't take into account at all the fact that other people have different experiences, leading to conclusions inconsistent with the ones they're trying to draw.
One can argue, though, that there is a commonality between all of those views that is something so intrinsic to human nature that senses that there is something transcendent, something non-physical, and whether it's expressed in a Trinitarian sense or a monotheistic Mohammed sense or an Eastern religion, that there's something there at its fundamental level that is of a non-physical character.
Well, that's an interesting, important response. I mean, suggesting that there's, so to speak, a core, okay, right, that is the same between the different experiences, and that it, so to speak, leads to valid conclusions, right? But if you look at the parts that disagree, what you find is they're heavily dependent upon the culture in which one is raised, right? If you're raised in India, the probability you would have a vision of the Virgin Mary would not be very high, whereas if you're raised in Spain, it might be much higher, right? So what we know is that a person's culture, the family in which he or she was raised, has a real impact upon the content of the experience, right? And the question is whether, given that so, it's reasonable to believe that nonetheless there is a core that's reliable.
What do you think of the language arguments, the logical positivism, the thoughts that religious language, religious questions in general, are either empty of all fact or just literally meaningless?
I think that view is unsound. In fact, I wrote my dissertation on precisely that topic, right?
I didn't know that.
That's right. And so one of the things I argued was that theological statements interpreted as referring to a transcendent person and so on were cognitively significant, right? And so the positivist arguments are interesting, but I think they're mistaken.
So that religious questions are factually meaningful and have a real existence to them.
That's right, yes. That's true of theological statements, but also true of other religious statements, because many religious statements have an empirical content and actually are empirically testable and so on, right? And so I think that religious statements across the board are significant, and that one can have evidence both for and against the truth of those claims.
So the religious questions and statements are meaningful. Whether they have a truth value or they're false is a completely different subject.
That's right, yes, quite so.